right. Thanks everybody for joining. My name is Jason DeMoss. I'm with Mergent, and I will be the host of today's webinar. Before we get started, I was just going to go through a couple of housekeeping slides. So thanks again, everybody, for joining the Michigan Wetland Association webinar series. And thanks everybody for being a member. Because everybody that's a member, you're able to help support MWA's daily operational costs. And of course, you get to join all these great webinars and get all the discounts on our yearly trainings. And thank you to everybody that attended the 2023 conference. It was super successful. And also thank you everybody for a great training season this year. The training committee is currently planning all of the trainings for 2024. Our upcoming webinars, we will have Rachel from the Army Corps talk about basic Army Corps permitting on December 5th from 3:30 to 4:30 p.m. So be on the lookout for that invite. And if you are interested in presenting for Michigan Wetland Association's webinar series, feel free to email Nicole Stewart at Fishbeck. And if you have any topic suggestions, like I said, we were currently planning for the 2024 webinar season. So today's webinar, of course, we're on Zoom. Everybody that's attending will be muted and it'll be anonymous. The webinar is currently being recorded and it will be posted on YouTube for anybody that can't join or that wants to watch it again. You should see a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So if you have any questions, please submit them through that Q&A feature. And at the very end, we will address the questions that are submitted. So today's webinar is the U.S. Department of Agriculture Natural Resources Conservation Service. We have Dan Zay, and he'll be talking about the Food Security Act wetland compliance component of the Food Security Act. So I will stop sharing and I will hand it off to Dan to share his screen.
Thanks, Jason. Happy to be with you today to talk about the Food Security Act. We typically talk about these programs together, the highly erodible land and wetland compliance. Today, of course, we're focusing mostly on the wetland compliance component.
Are you sharing your screen? Sorry.
I am. Oops. Do I need to do that? I guess, yeah.
Yes.
Here we go. How's that?
You'll have to switch the,
yeah. We have to switch that thing again. There we go.
Perfect.
Okay. Let's start again. Well, happy to be here today to talk about wetland compliance with you in terms of the Food Security Act. I'm Dan Zay. I'm the State Resource Conservationist for the NRCS in Michigan. By way of background, I'm a landscape architecture graduate from Purdue University. I spent time as the roadside coordinator for the Indiana DOT. I worked as a regional ecologist with the Indiana DNR Division of Nature Preserves. After that, I got into consulting, first with J.F. New and Associates, doing wetland permitting and all manner of biological studies, largely in support of transportation work. I continued in that vein with a company called DLZ in Michigan, DLZ Architects and Engineers. Again, supporting wetland permitting work, largely for transportation projects, but I've worked all over the Midwest, Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Kentucky. And after DLZ, I was a project manager for the Army Corps of Engineer Regulatory Office, Indianapolis office, Louisville district, clearing permitting efforts down there, largely focused on transportation again. And after that, I was a state biologist for the NRCS back up here in Michigan, and became the promoted to the State Resource Con in 2020, right before COVID. So my first week in this position was all about organizing my staff to work remotely. So I was in charge of 12 discipline specialists, and for the first 2 years of my tenure as the SRC, I felt like I was the king of nothing, because I never saw anybody except through remote efforts like today. But let's go ahead and talk about Food Security Act, wetland compliance. Wetland compliance is came about the time that the nation was working with the Clean Water Act, Section 404, wetland protections, and USDA and interest in farming were concerned about having to be regulated under that framework. So folks that dealt with the Farm Bill came up with wetland compliance. It's more of a carrot than a stick approach to protecting wetlands. And basically, wetland compliance is a gateway to access to Farm Bill programs. The Farm Bill includes a variety of programs. It's one of the biggest pieces of legislation that the country has. It gets revised or updated every 4 or 5 years, depending upon Congress's abilities. But it includes a lot of things not seemingly unrelated directly to farming, but it includes the CRP, Conservation Reserve Program, EQIP, which is Environmental Quality Improvement Program, various farm loan programs, various crop insurance programs, all those kinds of things. But the bottom line is farmers need to self-certify that they have not converted wetlands to commodity production. Wetlands that were in place at the time of the 1985 Farm Bill, which is December 23rd, 1985. And so, like a lot of federal programs, we trust but verify. And a lot of what I'm going to be talking today about is our process of verifying and assuring that producers have not converted wetlands to commodity production. And that's really the specific hook here. From as far as the Farm Bill goes, a farmer can fill in a wetland and put a barn on it, and they are not out of compliance technically with the Farm Bill program. But if they make it capable of being cropped, that's kind of the federal hook that puts their eligibility in question. So again, this all came about in the 1985 Farm Bill. Oh, and I need to underscore the fact that because of the way we're set up, the 1980 Farm Bill, we look at wetlands in the context of 1985 as normal conditions. And I'll expound on that as we go along here. But the Farm Bill wetland compliance provisions are in 7 CFR Part 12. And after that, we developed our policy and guidance in the National Food Security Act Manual, NFSAM, Part 510. And that fleshes out how we handle wetland compliance actions, how we determine eligibility, how we handle mitigation to allow producers, we call farmers producers, how we allow producers to get back eligible if they've impacted a wetland. And then because of the fact that the Farm Bill gets renewed every 4 or 5 years, there has been some historic refinements, and the most recent one is the that we've engaged is the minimal effects exemption. We have an interim policy in Michigan. And Alex can expound on that a little bit later, but it's the Farm Bill does not designate, this the bottom end of what we would consider a wetland. So a very, very small area. If the farmer fills it in, they could put their entire operation ineligible for Farm Bill benefits if they, fill 1/10 of an acre of isolated wetland. But there is a process in place where they can make a case to get a minimal effects exemption. And so Michigan is kind of leading the nation in terms of, a process to evaluate and provide that review for minimal effects. It's important to also recognize that the NRCS makes the technical determination as to what is a wetland, and FSA, our sister agency, Farm Services Agency, they handle the money, so they determine the eligibility of various producers and their requirements for wetland compliance. So from a national perspective, let's see, I'm going to have to shift gears here a little bit. It's important to recognize Michigan's role nationally for wetlands. And this is a summary of 2014 to 2021. Can everybody see the Excel spreadsheet here?
Yep,
Okay.
we can see it.
Yeah, it's important to see that there's 9 states that comprise the bulk of various compliance actions at the top of the list here. Includes Iowa, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nebraska. Michigan competes for the top slot in a given year. And you can see we do a really robust amount of work. We do about 2,300 plus or minus in a given year. And that's, it's no surprise because Michigan has an abundant wetland resources. And those, of course, interact with our areas that are developed for farmland. And so we, naturally involves a lot of compliance work and management. But it's also important from a operational standpoint because if there's changes to the program or something like that, it impacts us exponentially more than other states. Here it shows that there's 41 states that have less than half of the amount of actions that we have. And there's actually 29 states that have less than 1/10 of the amount. So if there's changes down there with those folks when they're only doing 200 compliance actions a year, it doesn't affect their workload at all. But recent things like the acceptance or the development of the CD compliance log impacted us pretty importantly. And the fact that it didn't come along with any additional staffing resources, suggests that maybe there was an impact to our effectiveness. Let's see, go here. I'm going to have to switch this back each time. That's all right. So that's kind of the national perspective there, but it does put us in the crosshairs of folks that are concerned about wetland protection, and also folks that think wetland protection isn't their responsibility. And so we have had to be innovative to get our program up to the level that where we are now, and we have to provide quality service because we certainly hear about it if anything ever slips through the cracks. Our Michigan program structure. Now, historically, the Farm Bill has been deployed at the field office level. For folks that know the NRCS, we have had a history of having offices, almost at every county, and that has been replicated across the country, which puts our folks, in close proximity to the customers and producers. But wetland compliance initially was deployed at the field office. It was field office focused. And with our primary mission, one of our primary missions being deploying conservation hand in glove with the producers to help keep their farming operations sustainable. It suggested an operational conflict where on one hand, we're working closely with the farmer on conservation, and on the other hand, we have this quasi-regulatory function where, we might, a farmer might come in one day and you're helping him with an EQIP project, and the next day he comes in and you're saying, hey, you filled in a wetland, you might not be eligible. And so with that being the case in Michigan, we segued into a more centralized structure for this. We have a state cadre that do preliminary determinations, which is the first level determination. And then every decision that we render goes out with appeal rights. And so as appeals get requested by producers, that work largely will go to the area offices. So there's just, our structure sets up a little bit more of an air gap between the conservation folks that are working with the producers and the compliance folks. And we feel that that provides a little more clarity and more consistency and equitable review of wetland compliance tasks. We aren't necessarily for or against the farmers on wetland compliance. We're calling the balls and strikes given the program that we are required to deploy. And here's our group of people. We interact with all these wetland compliance guys. We get together, guys and gals. We get together and we do trainings. We do start of season kickoffs. We do end of season after action reviews. We look at case studies. We share examples of things that are unusual or issues that come up. With smartphones, we interact in the field. If somebody, even has a plant ID question when they're out in the field, they can send that to us and we get responses out to them. And so, we have a really well integrated group. We conduct a lot of peer review on any effort that gets compiled before it goes out. And so I think that stands as a testament to the quality of work we get out the door. And then from a organizational structure standpoint, you can see this is how it kind of lines up. Down here, we have a lot of our PTD preliminary determinations. We use state offsite methods, which involves a lot of geodata, and I'll take a look at that in a minute here. But these folks deal with, that vast amount of initial compliance actions that come in the door. And then this group up in here, up in the upper right, deals with the first level of appeals. And then the group in the upper left here deals with county committee appeals, what we call third level appeals. They deal with mitigation, and we deal with NAD director reviews over there. We'll go here. Excuse me, we're going to deal with this clunky little swap every time. That's okay. So our compliance actions involve a lot of moving parts, and this is how they line up. The Form 1026 is the self-certification form. Whenever a producer changes anything in their operation, they need to file a 1026 with FSA, because most farm bill payments are based on the amount and type of crop in production. And so as they make changes to the configurations of their fields, even the types of crops they are working with, they need to file a 1026. And as part of that, there's some wetland compliance questions that may trigger a review. Because of that, FSA is constantly looking at crop photos and from year to year when producers come in. And if they find a change in the landscape that might involve wetlands, they'll generate what we call a 569, which is just a form number that's a possible violation, and that will come to the NRCS to investigate. There's also a NRCS form called the 038, and this is just something that producers can initiate if they're interested in some additional review. But it's essentially a lower priority because the 038 typically is not related to a potential conversion activity or some change that they're doing. It's just kind of I want you to look at this kind of form. I mentioned our processing methods, where we have a lot of peer review, which supports quality assurance, quality control in our methods. Some states, some lower production states, we're having people making determinations in the field, and they're the only ones that have maybe wetland experience, so they're creating those and they're pushing them out the door without a lot of review. And review and verification prior to making a final determination is part of our process, and I think it underscores how effective we are here in Michigan. The first, I mentioned the preliminary technical determination is an offsite methods. We have a robust GeoTool that supports that. It is an offsite determination that provides location and approximate boundaries of wetland features. And it goes out with appeal rights. If producers have questions or concerns, they can request an appeal. But if they do not request an appeal, that becomes a final technical determination after a 30-day freshness date. If they request an appeal, it goes to a level 2 appeal. We call level 2s or recons. And that's where our investigators go on site. We use the 1987 core manual and the regional supplements as our field methodology. So that's one of the big differences between investigations for 404 or state of Michigan wetland investigations is that it's a two-step process. We use the 87 manual and the supplements to determine whether a feature is a wetland or not. And then we look at it in the context of what the conditions were in 1985 to develop our specific compliance labels. So that's the big difference between those two methodologies. And the output from a recon is a final technical determination on a Form 026. And then if the producer, again, that goes out with appeal rights, the producer can appeal to the county committee if they have additional information or something that suggests that maybe it doesn't meet the Farm Bill label requirements. They can appeal. The county committee are a group of farmers and FSA folks that meet on a regular basis. It's the group that allows for close agency regulated public interaction and review. But if the COC appeal goes through, it becomes a level 3. And at that point, we have the state soil scientist and the state biologist go out and investigate the issue, and it is typically done in the field. I mentioned the noncompliance, which is a form that the FSA instigates, and they send it our way, and the NRCS will examine the existing information and possibly go out in the field to confirm conditions. And then all these appeals that go out, the producer can appeal to the National Appeals Division for a NAD hearing, and that's to say we'll have an appeal judge, and the judge will sit there with the agency and the appellant, and their purview is to make sure that the agency is following through with our administrative and technical procedures. So at one level, the bar seems to be, should be fairly low, because, we just need to say we're doing the work that we're supposed to be doing. And so with our processes, we typically do not lose appeals. And we advise, producers of that as well. I mean, our appeals levels do not cost the producer anything. So some folks feel like they will ask for an appeal just because, but that, does take some amount of time, not only staff time, but their time to keep up with it. And so if they have a compliance issue, I try to encourage them to, let's just engage with some kind of mitigation or restoration situation instead of just, lining up on, opposite sides of the table to argue a losing case. But be that as it may. And after a decision is rendered in the National Appeals Division process, there's actually an additional appeal level where they can request that the director review the decision to make sure it's valid. Not too impactful, but I'm going to share just a visual. This is the 1026. It is generated by the producer. Again, it's self-certification, but we trust it, verify. Question 7 is basically what 6 and 7 is what we look at. I think just 7. We look at to determine if there's a compliance issue, if they've done any new drainage systems, land clearing, dredging that has not been evaluated, and if that's the case, it will be kicked up, and we'll take a look at it. And then here's the 569, the 038 form. Nothing big there. This is just a graphic that kind of shows the routing of these of the various appeals and reviews. Everything, of course, goes back to the producer, and it's all about them maintaining access to the farm bill. And just to put it in perspective, through various programs, some of these farmers can have quite a bit of exposure to farm bill money, sometimes 10, maybe even hundreds of thousands of dollars on an annual basis. And but they are invariably a little antagonistic towards wetlands. And we'll see people that will, get themselves in trouble over a 1/10 or a 1/4 acre of a wetland and put their whole farm bill payment at risk, because a lot of farm bill payments are relegated at a per acre rate. And so, and if they fill in a 1/10 of an acre over in this field, their whole operation is out of eligibility. And so, it really doesn't make sense for folks to do that. And I always try to give them additional ideas on how to consider it. Like, if they don't like the fact that they can't, farm that little wet spot or grain or farm it, I sometimes I'll say, hey, just consider, your farm bill payments as rent on that little bit of a wetland there. There's a national interest in protecting wetlands, and you're getting farm bill money, and that's kind of how that goes. As we go through the year, especially during the growing season, we analyze our throughput on various compliance actions. These are some maps that show the distribution of reconsiderations. These are the level 2s on the left. And then the table that's attached to that map shows a little bit more detail on the throughput there. The requests 30 days old or waiting field action, those are typically the 569s or the 1026s that may include some kind of conversion activity. So we do need to get on the ground field truthing before those go out. And then the final map there on the right are typically showing just the preliminary determinations. And we're doing these maps every other week all year long. So it gives a real good snapshot of our throughput and production on these various compliance actions. Our digital tools, like I said, with the production that we have in Michigan, we've had to innovate, and we've there is a compliance conservation desktop log, the CD log. That's a new national tool because of interest in compliance at the national level. They came up with this log because Congress is interested in how much of this work is going on. So the national folks can, print out production on the compliance log. Because of the way we work, we also maintain a SharePoint log, which tracks the movement of a project all the way through from initiation to completion. We have a very robust geodata tool, which I'll share some information on here shortly. Again, we have the preliminary determination, which the geodata kicks out, almost a complete report in a semi-automated fashion. The FTD letter is also has some automation available in it. And we do have a minimal effect. The MW determination utilizes some of our geodata sampling, and then a functions and values analysis to determine whether a specific feature is eligible for minimal effect determination. So this is just a static image of some of our geodata capability. What's showing here is a hillshade representation of our LiDAR. NRCS paid a big chunk of money into flying the state of Michigan in our agricultural areas to level 2 LiDAR. So it's pretty good resolution. This product is the hillshade with a 2-foot contour model overlaying on it. So you can see that we got real good resolution of topography. If you look at the table of contents on the left, you can see we have a lot of geodata layers that we refer to. We have the NWI, we have all the soils maps, we have the soil hydric ratings, we have the MIRIS land use, USGS quads or the DRGs. We have our National Agriculture Inventory photographs. Those are flown every other year. So we have all the NAPES from current back to 2005. And then in addition, we have a whole separate layer of all the crop aerial photos from 2000 back to 1985. And so we can, see the whole history of any one of these wetland features from what we consider normal conditions in 1985. Again, our field methods should be familiar to most of you folks here. Our field process is the 87 manual, which, we confirm 3 factors, hydric soils, presence of or indication of wetland hydrology, and a dominance of hydrophytic vegetation. So those are, we we provide observations on those independently, but they are corroborating factors as well. We use the regional supplements. Michigan's largely northeast, north central, but we do have a little piece of Midwest that comes in from the southern part of Michigan. Let's see, and then our label determinations again reflect normal conditions as of December 23rd, 1985. And our label, we have quite a few wetland labels that come out of the wetland compliance program. Many of them really have fallen into disuse. We have the important ones are converted wetlands, converted wetland plus year because of the amount of aerial imagery we have. Sometimes it's important to show not only that it's wetland's been converted, but the year the conversion occurred, because sometimes there's a gap between when a producer converts a wetland and when the agency actually identifies it. And if that's the case, producers could owe back money to the agency. There was one not too long ago where a producer owed $1.4 million back to the agency over converted wetlands. So, instead of looking with a jaundiced eye at the compliance program, we certainly encourage producers to engage with the agency ahead of time and in detail. Farm to wetland is another label that is utilized quite a bit, and that's a wetland that possibly was manipulated before 85, but still meets inundation or saturation criteria. And so that's that label we still find a little bit of use for. Now, for emergent wetlands, there's kind of an interesting thing that under normal conditions, producers can crop emergent wetlands in a year that's dry enough that they can get equipment in it. And so that's makes it kind of tricky, and the footprint of an emergent wetland can be a little dynamic from year to year. But scrub or forested wetlands, those boundaries should be pretty tight from 1985 to today. Because of mitigation, sometimes we have a mitigation exemption where a feature was converted, but they've mitigated for it elsewhere. And so we'll have both of those features labeled and tie them back to each other in the attribute data. Minimal effect exemption, again, is that newer functions and values review. The prototype that might meet the minimal effect exemption is a pretty small wetland that's been impacted over time and has very little functions and values, and in the context of wetlands in the area and wildlife value has they can convert a little piece of that without coming out of eligibility, but they do need to coordinate with the agency ahead of time because the onus does shift to the producer if they get into an after the fact situation, which is very difficult to defend through that process. Prior converted cropland is, again, areas that may have been hydric soil, but have been drained and converted to cropland prior to December 23rd, 1985. And generally speaking, once PC, always PC, and is how the agency approaches prior converted. And then we have wetlands and manipulated wetlands. We'll find situations where either the vegetation has been impacted, there's been an attempt to partially drain but not bring into production areas, and we will label those as WX, and that's kind of like a yellow light for the producers to make sure that they know that we know that they've been mucking around in their wetland. The minimal effects exemption, I don't want to go into a lot of detail on that. It is an interim exemption because it was a tool that was developed in concert with some of our national technical experts in our technical team in the central region. And we rolled it out in part as to, see how it works. We've had over 170 reviews since we've rolled out the interim, and only like a half a dozen, less than 10, have been awarded. And the minimal effect tool, the analysis, has been spitting out the types of results that we've kind of anticipated. What we've learned with this tool maybe is being used to advise a national tool that they hope to roll out within the next couple of years. So we'll see how that goes. A new thing with mitigation, there is producer-directed mitigation available to help producers who have a converted wetland get back into eligibility. And they can do that either by restoring the footprint they've impacted or another site offsite. And whereas folks who have been doing wetland permitting, for mitigation, one of the biggest challenges is finding land for mitigation. But with farmers, there's hardly a farm out there that doesn't have some little prior converted spot that's, wet and they can't get a crop off of, every other year. And so there's usually an area on an existing farm where these producers can mitigate for a small impact. But outside that, we also instituted about 5 years ago a mitigation bank program. And we have 2 different sponsors in the state. And let's see, I can share with you. Right now we have these watersheds all have bank credits available to them. And so we have approximately 1,400 converted wetland features in the state of Michigan right now, to the tune of 2,500 acres. Probably 600 to 700 producers are out of compliance because of those conversions. So the idea is that these banks will help a lot of those producers get back in compliance. It actually inspires some to even mitigate for their compliance issue on site. So it has had that kind of roll on as well. But we figure at the credit rates that are being paid for right now that the agriculture mitigation bank market is about a $54 million market right now. So there's certainly room for additional sponsors to get on board and create more ag mitigation banks in the state of Michigan. Let's see, we'll jump through this hoop again. Field responsibilities have been narrowed quite a bit, like I've mentioned earlier. They basically do the tracking of the action, and they're the point of contact with producer. We always maintain a very local point of contact with the producer, even though the decisions for these determinations are done in a more centralized manner when they go out to the producer. We copy the local field office, and the producers can come in and get clarity on some questions or be routed to somebody with technical expertise to answer their question. So that gives the producers a feeling like they've got an ear with the agency. And there's also through that process, of course, there's some interpretation and guidance with the producer that happens at the field office level. And this final slide that I have here is just a hyperlink with some additional highly erodible land and wetland compliance resources. The 85 Food Security Act statute, the CFR, Conservation and Wetland Conservation, the final rule, the December 2018 interim final rule, which included some improvements and some updates, conservation compliance and USDA programs, kind of our general web page, and then Michigan SharePoint wetland compliance resources is an inward facing resource, so you wouldn't be able to access that because it's on our in-house SharePoint. But that's what I have today, and I think we're on time for some questions.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Dan. So far we don't have any questions that were typed in. So anybody that's in the webinar, feel free to type in your question at the bottom. I did actually get one question texted to me, but is there ever any I guess double dipping, or where the producer has to deal with compliance or violations with both NRCS and Eagle? And do you ever work with Eagle to ever deal with those sorts of issues?
You know, there's and Congress has done this on purpose, but there's a real solid wall through protections of PII and other program structures that prevent us from interacting directly with the 404 and in Michigan standpoint, Michigan wetland regulation. So all of our determinations go out the door with a disclaimer that their given wetland feature might be doubly regulated with Farm Bill and with Eagle compliance or Eagle wetland regulations. And it's up to them to make sure that they check in with their Eagle offices on those types of issues. It's it's just a way that Congress structured how we interact, and so it's up to like always, it's up to the landowner to make sure that they're responsible for any permitting issues that go along with development on their land. But that's how that's set up. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, we have gotten some questions sent in. So first is what makes an agricultural mitigation bank different than a regular mitigation bank?
Well, for one, because of our interaction and focus on agricultural resources and sustaining national food production, those credits are directed only to farmers. So you don't get in and buy credits from us that resolve Eagle wetland compliant or wetland violation issues. So there's that. Because of our the biggest type of compliance issues we have are to palustrin forested wetlands. So most of our credits are forested wetland credits. So that's kind of a focus there. So that's kind of the big thing there. Now, conversely, producers, and then because of the focus on agriculture, there tends to be a different economic model that goes into pricing the credits. And that's kind of interesting and dynamic and unique. But conversely, farmers can approach us to buy bank credits from Eagle Bank, and we will evaluate what their impacts are and whether the credits they hope to buy from Eagle would offset those impacts. We tend to not do much of that because the the cost of credits through Eagle's wetland program tend to be a little pricier on a per credit basis.
Well, actually, and then continuing from that, somebody asked, how much does it cost for an acre of wetland mitigation from a NRCS mitigation bank?
The agency does not participate in setting those rates. It's intended like all mitigations, like all mitigation banks rather. The whole model is dependent on private and market-driven costs, and so we stay really pretty far arm's length on that because they're buying credits from the sponsor. They aren't buying credits from the NRCS. The sponsors try to be competitive. If they could price themselves right out of the market, so they're constantly looking at what the costs are. We had one sponsor start with $10,000 an acre, and in short order, they realized they were probably leaving money on the table, and they weren't generating enough revenue to arguably keep their operation running, given the cost of creating the wetlands. So they revisited their pricing structure, but it can vary. It looks like right now it's running anywhere from 15 to maybe 30,000 an acre. But as an example, the first mitigation bank credit that we sold in the state of Michigan, the producer cut a check for $30,000. He had three acres of converted wetlands. He needed 3 acres of credit, and they were priced at 10,000 acres, so he got a check for 30,000. FSA was holding $300,000 of farm bill payments in abeyance because of their eligibility issue, and that, as soon as they signed that check, FSA released that money, and that 300,000 hit their bank before the check cleared. And so you can see that some of the producers, and it varies quite, now I need to caveat that, it varies quite a bit on an individual producer's exposure to farm bill programs, right? But that's an example of how effectively and efficiently the producer could resolve their eligibility issue.
Thank you for that. Has the recent Supreme Court Sackett decision impacted NRCS's administration of wetland compliance at the federal level?
No, doesn't change anything in wetland compliance at all. We've arguably, like with Swank and the impact to isolated wetlands, at some level you could argue that Farm Bill compliance has provided more protection to isolated wetlands since Swank than the 404 program has. So that hasn't changed anything at all. And we needed to, we spent a lot of time underscoring that because all the time people, not only in Michigan, but at the national level, will try to conflate 404 and Farm Bill compliance. And there's, a unique separation in there. So a lot of these core rulings and people try to loop concerns for the producer into those 404 Supreme Court rulings, and they don't apply from wetland compliance issue because it's eligibility. It's a gateway to access to Farm Bill programs.
Perfect. So we have about 5 minutes left and 2 more questions. So the next question is, what is the status of the Wetlands Reserve Program? Are projects still being funded? Are the wetlands that were part of WRP now being released? And do you ever see any pressures to develop or impact any of those WRP wetlands?
That's a good question. It's certainly outside wetland compliance. It's another one of our conservation programs. And WRP has transitioned. The current term for that is wetland reserve easement. Some of those used to be term limited projects rather. And we've transitioned to where they're all permanent easements. And so those are, there's no pressure to convert or alter those now because those are perpetual easements that are are put on those sites. The funding does vary a little bit from year to year and based on the projects that are in the pipeline. With the Inflation Reduction Act money that's coming in, that's focused on climate smart conservation practices. Wetland restoration is certainly a carbon sequestration focus. And so there's it's a little unknown, but there's likely going to be a slug of IRA money that will funnel through that program. So wetland WRE is one of those programs that, because of personally identifiable information restrictions, it's probably one of the most successful wetland restoration programs that nobody knows about, because, you know, to protect PII, we don't advertise, you know, the successes of those projects when they go on the ground very much. And so we have hundreds of thousands of acres of WRE in the state of Michigan that, you know, isn't largely understood. But it's a successful program, and we're still doing it. And you know, if you know of anybody that's interested in restoring wetlands on their agricultural lands, send them our way.
Perfect. So the next question is, what if a producer has an isolated wetland that is not regulated under the Clean Water Act or Michigan's Part 303? Can they convert the wetland and maintain eligibility for subsidies?
No, not without mitigating it, or you know, it's like always, you want to avoid impacts if you can, or you can mitigate on site if it's a small wetland, or you can buy wetland bank credits if there's a bank in your watershed. But like I mentioned earlier, there's no minimal size in the Farm Bill that describes, you know, an agricultural wetland feature. And so, you know, that's a pretty profound difference between the two programs. And in fact,
And
yeah,
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
that's
Go
all.
ahead.
No, I mean,
Uh,
well, I guess I could expound briefly that, you know, we found that very small habitat features are really important for invertebrates. And, you know, worldwide, there's a concern about declines in beneficial insect populations and pollinators. And, you know, small wetland features are really important hotspots to protect those in agricultural areas. So it's consistent to maintain small habitat features as well as large.
let's see, we have a minute left and one question. So where can someone find guidance on NRCS wetland banking policy or requirements?
That map that I showed previously with the bank sites on it, that's available. Let's see, I think I can share that in the chat, right?
You might be able to.
Let me see if I can share that in the chat. Yeah. So you can go, yeah, should be able to click on that and get right to that link. And when you click on those features, it will give you information on how to contact those specific sponsors. And from a national standpoint, there is, you can Google NRCS or USDA wetland compliance or mitigation banks, and there's all kinds of information on the internets about that.
We actually got one more question, so let me just see if we can get this really quick. So do you know what percentage of producers participate in Farm Bill programs?
That's a real good question. And it of course, it varies from time to time. And we have programs that come up periodically to respond to drought, other damaging events. So we always encourage producers to remain compliant. Involvement in Farm Bill is voluntary. Compliance is compulsory if you want to be in Farm Bill programs. But we see between 80 and 90% of the producers out there involved in farm bill programs at some level or another, either with loans or crop insurance, even if they aren't in our conservation program specifically. So we have quite a bit of involvement of producers in farm bill.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dan, for your time, and this was a great presentation. Um, so like I said, the this was recorded, and so anybody that wants to watch it again or wants to share it, you'll receive an email with the recording. Um, and with that, thank you everybody, and thanks again, Dan.
I appreciate it. Thanks for taking some time, and you can always reach out to me if you